Well, hello, everybody. It's good to have you all here. We're gathered together with a handful, not all of the volunteers, but a handful of our core volunteers at the virtual chapel. So this is a group of dear friends who have gotten to know each other quite well over several years. Yeah, and we're just going to talk about the chapel itself and how we found it and why we stuck around and all those sorts of things. It's such a beautiful gift in my life, is the truth. Living out here where I do in the middle of nowhere, I do preach locally, and actually I have to give them some credit. The church I've been preaching at locally lately has been interested in my obscure things about the cloud of unknowing and stuff like that, and they've actually let me preach some sermons on those things, and it's been really lovely. But in general, the people who are interested in the things that I'm in are scattered across the face of the earth in tiny little pockets here and there. And so it's quite marvelous that the internet has made us able to come together and to, for me at least, to have a place where I can just be myself in my spiritual journey and not have to feel like I'm trying to fit into a church where I don't match or whatever. Yeah. Well, with that said, maybe I'll pass the mic along and let some other people talk for a bit. I'm sure I always am long-winded, so I'll get in there eventually. Yeah, I don't know if people want to go ahead and just introduce yourselves and see where we go from there.
I jump in. Hi, I'm Tony Marshall Griffith. I'm one of the volunteer group. I've been in virtual chapel since about 3.5 years ago. I think it was the back end of the first pandemic year, 2020, when I connected with the chapel and became a volunteer maybe kind of 6-9 months after that, sometime during the following year. So at the moment, I host one of the monthly Saturday chapel meetings. So that's the third Saturday of the month when I usually have that pleasure. And it really is a pleasure to hold space for those meetings. To help with the book group, Jim and I are running a series at the moment. We've got the third of 3 on Brian McLaren's book coming up in 2 weeks' time, at the time of recording, but that will probably be in the past, maybe by this time this goes out. And I moderate our very lovely Celtic Christianity Facebook group, which is part of New Eden Ministries' Facebook footprint as well.
So I'll go next. I'm Jim Bono, and I live in a suburb of Chicago, out west of the city. I've been in the chapel. I think I stumbled across it a couple of years ago as part of a book study. I follow Richard Rohr in the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque. And Justin and Mike Petra, who's at the center, were doing something together, and that is the bridge that pulled me into the chapel and made me first aware of it. And I was intrigued because it was looking at stuff at a sort of deeper level than you typically run across in church. I'm part of a Lutheran church. It's liturgical. It happens to be a liberal branch of the Lutheran church, but it's still very liturgical. So we follow the lectionary and the typical readings and whatnot. And that's great. I really enjoy it, but there's not really an opportunity for studying deeper things or any of the history in particular, though you might run across a contemporary author. Some of the things that Justin was mentioning about the early authors, particularly the early Celtic authors, some of the deaths of mothers and fathers, you just don't get a chance to get exposed to in a typical church setting. And also I had been going through a sort of deconstruction, reconstruction phase, and I've found the chapel to be very helpful for working through those sorts of things. Like Tony and some of the others, I anchor one of the Saturday studies. He mentioned that we're doing a book study together. There are also communion services that are scattered throughout the year. that we do. And we have fireside chats where we get together and there's not a particular topic, but we'll just have an opportunity for sharing what's going on in our lives or answering questions, etc. I also like the breadth of folks who show up at the chapel. There have been folks who have, like everybody has a sort of Christian background, but there are folks who have deep roots in Buddhism, deep roots in Hindu faith, deep roots. We've had folks who are practicing Wiccans. And you know what? They're all welcome and they're all okay. And we have all learned something from welcoming and listening to different perspectives. So again, you don't often find that in a church. There are sort of sometimes literally written and often unwritten barriers. And I really appreciate that the doors are open here at the chapel.
I'll go next. My name is Julie, and I've been part of the virtual chapel for a long time. I don't know how long it is now. I found it after being part of one of Richard Rohr's conferences online that then had a Facebook group. And they intentionally closed that Facebook group after a year. And those of us who are taking a deep dive into all things spiritual felt like we lost a home base. And so I landed here among some others, and this has become my church family. Like Jim, I grew up Lutheran. I still consider myself Christian, but pretty fringe Christian. I see Jesus's table as expansive and wide and welcoming of all. I see the awe of the universe and appreciate the gifts of the world around me, whether it's nature, art, music, or the people around me. And I have found that the chapel is a very welcoming place where I can totally geek out on the depths of spirituality. And that's, like Jim said, is not a place that you can do that just anywhere. It is, I've met a few people in person, including Toto, which was lovely. But we're online, but yet there is a deep connection, and we share what's some of the stuff that's deepest in our hearts and most some of our anguish and our joys, and together we lift those up, and we celebrate and commiserate in some of the most compassionate ways I've ever been part of as a group, and it's online. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I keep coming back. I am one of the moderators for the Facebook group. I lead every third Monday and occasionally lead communion depending on the particular month. I really appreciate that it's a space where I can be innovative. So I can pull in from different faith traditions and poetry and music, and we can look at readings and everything with connected, because I feel like everything is spiritual and everything can be connected at a heart and soul level. And we get a chance to discuss that here.
I'll go next. I'm Phil Kemp. I'm originally from London, now live in Iowa City, Iowa. I'm a retired insurance agent, now turned into my dream career, running my own self-publishing business, Little Feline Press. And I joined the chapel about coming up on 3 years ago now. I'm not quite sure how I stumbled across the chapel, but anyway, I was persuaded that this might be a good community. I must have seen a post or something, so I came along to one of the meetings and I was instantly hooked. It's rather like, I've always said, it's rather like the beginning of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where the children open the wardrobe in the old house and they suddenly find themselves in Narnia. The virtual chapel community has become my community, my spiritual community. This was in the first year or so of the pandemic, when my own church had basically shifted to all online. And because of that, and because of health concerns, I've not really been back into personal churches. So New Eden has really, and virtual chapel has really become my spiritual home. In June of 22, I was asked if I'd join the volunteer group, and I said, sure, yeah. And since then, I also host one of the meetings on the 5th Saturday of the month. I am involved in a book group, and in fact, after the book that Tony was talking about earlier, I and another member of the volunteer group, Rebecca, are going to be co-hosting a 3 months on studying the Divine Dance by Richard Rohr and Mike Morell, starting in May. And that book group's always the first Wednesday of every month, and we managed to have a good discussion. And I just love coming along to chapel. You know, I'm a very, because of my situation, I'm now a very regular attender, and it is, as others have said, just great to get so many perspectives, so many inputs, so much that I'm learning. And last year, I had the privilege of actually taking part in an in-person retreat with Justin, Jim, and Tony and others on Manitoulin Island, and that was just great to be with fellow mystics, fellow Christians who are interested in the same kind of things that I'm interested in, who can talk about theology at the drop of a hat. And generally, I'm just so enriched by this community.
Well, let's see. I'm Toto. I'm from North Texas in the US, and not the German North Texas, I guess, or I don't know why I said the US. I joined about 4 years ago, I'm thinking, because it was the middle of the pandemic, and it was a source for me too, after exploring the Richard Rohr group, to continue the conversation with like-minded people who were kind of still had a spiritual hunger for more that may not be answered in their local church, especially when the pandemic hit and the doors were shut. But I'd really not found a local church that our family is comfortable with, in large because of their stance with LGBTQ, which is something that at the virtual chapel, it's very, it is very open and inclusive and embracing, which is important to us. I mean, my family, too, we don't have anyone in our direct family that's LGBTQ, but we do see a lot of hurt and harm locally and online, and it's something that touches all of our lives a lot. So it's neat to see that very affirming group of people that just don't, it doesn't matter here, you know, at the chapel, either in our online meetings or even on in Facebook, the conversations that we have are very loving and kind and healing to all kinds of people. And I think it's great because it is hard to find, like, we still don't have a local church home, but this is my family. This is my community that I can learn and grow with and share with. And yeah, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I really love to hear all of you describe it. It's kind of a treat for me. So thank you for that. Yeah, lovely. I was thinking about how I'm moving soon. For those of you who don't know, I mean, all of you know. But one of the things that's really cool about it too is that it's not going to change this at all. And so I'm moving because I sort of have to. I won't go into all the details. But like, if I had an in-person community, I would have had to lose that community. It's that, you know, you keep in touch, whatever, but it's not the same. But here it doesn't matter. I can go anywhere in the world, and this place is always just in my pocket, which is kind of cool. Yeah, you know, it's lovely to hear all you describe these things. I mean, my hope when I had started the chapel was very much what you all are describing. I knew from my own experience living in the middle of nowhere that that there's a need for various kinds of religious community. I mean, there's plenty of churches where I live. There's plenty of churches everywhere. And some of them are great people, and I genuinely love them, and I don't want to say anything against them anyway, but it's just a different sort of perspective that I like to take. I like to often go a little bit deeper, as people who read my writing probably picked up on. I get a little too deep maybe sometimes, get stuck in the weeds. But yeah, it's been a real blessing to be able to share this with you guys. So thank you so much. And also, as it's been nice to see from a personal perspective, as I guess I'm getting kind of touchy-feely here. I didn't know I was going to go that direction, but I, you know, I've been having a bit of a struggle. Our lives have sort of fallen into some chaos, and I've been sort of treading water and trying to keep up to a certain extent. And I haven't even been to chapel much lately. But I showed up the other day, just the timing worked, and the baby was with Renee in a different place, and I was able to make it happen. And it was lovely just to see how it was still just continuing on in this beautiful way, in this wonderful space that I hadn't contributed to recently in any way, was still just flourishing and being wonderful. And it was really, really heartwarming to have that too. So it's been something that's been carrying me. So thank you for that.
And, you know, I think, Justin, that part of what the chapel, part of how the chapel enables that to happen is its very different format. And I was sort of touching on this when I was mentioning that my participation in a local liturgically based church. I've been just a church mutt. I mean, I've been in every different kind of church, like just all over the board. And, you know, I'm perfectly happy where I am now most days. But what the chapel allows is something that you just don't find really in a church. And Julie mentioned that, you know, we can bring in different sort of resources. We can bring in a Buddhist sutra. We can bring in something from the Upanishads. We can bring in a gospel reading or a reading from the epistles. But we'll do that reading after we gather for a bit and exchange greetings. And then we'll have 15 minutes of silence, which if you had 15 minutes of silence in a church service, folks would just be itchy. And then we go on to other readings, and then we have a wonderful time of discussion, which again, you just don't get in a church setting. There's a lecture, it's called a sermon or a homily. And so there's really no interaction, really no opportunity to ask questions, really no chance of like digging into whatever the material is, if it's a wonderful Mary Oliver poem or a Bob Dylan song, or something out of Thessalonians. You just don't get that shot at doing that. And so it's a bit like if a Quaker meeting somehow got updated, with no offense meant to the Quakers, but that sort of thing that is really quite magical that happens when people are able to go around the room and, well, this is how that struck me, or wait, what does it mean when it says that? I find that really an extremely unique aspect of the chapel that I just don't get at all in another setting. So that's one of the things that keeps me coming back, which is, and it doesn't matter if it's like a really, really, really ancient and relatively obscure reading, or if it's something that's really super contemporary, that is just a structural thing that has been really a huge benefit for me personally.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that, because what I see with the readings is that everybody who picks the readings picks them with great care. And they often have a similar theme, but kind of are juxtaposed against each other, where there's slight differences, whether it's in the theme and kind of different time periods, or different types of things. You mentioned poetry. We will bring in Gnostic Gospels, so it could be or scripture, or mystical writings by both contemporary and ancient. And in that kind of tension between the readings and then the discussion, it's always greater than the sum of its parts. And there's enough diversity of viewpoints and perspectives within the group that everybody, as we're sharing, there's a certain synergistic effect where when you dive that deep, of course, you're bringing in your own projections into it. But as you're listening to other things, it's like the door opens and all this meaning and beauty and relevance comes in. And it seems like no matter what the readings are, they're touching everybody really deeply. And more often than not, they're exactly what certain people need to hear that day. So I might be picking things that just tickle my fancy on a particular day, like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and that's kind of interesting, and this third thing's interesting, and wouldn't be fun to talk about all of it together, and then find out that another member really needed to hear that, whether it's the readings themselves or what somebody else in the group discussed. And that's the magical quality, Jim, that I think you're describing, is that it really does feed the soul on a deep, deep level.
Yeah, I agree, Julie. And one of the things that I found that's really interesting that is often not true in other sort of Facebook-based groups is that I've seen in other Facebook-based groups like a lot of arguing about stuff. Like, people will take a particular doctrinal position and they'll just argue it to death. And that tends to happen, I don't know, maybe out of a particular demographic. I think if you want to link back to Richard Rohr and his first half of life stuff in his book Falling Upward, that certainty of framing the container, and so you've got to have the right interpretation, and that just really doesn't happen in chapel. I don't know if it's all because we've all just been kicked around a bit by our life experience, which I think we know each other well enough to know that that's absolutely true, that we have been kicked around a bit, and are reconstructing. But really appreciate that somebody can come to the chapel and have a really different perspective, and people will listen. And whether that's, you know, born out of their own religious history or their own areas of interest and study, I like that that's all welcome, and I'm enriched by that.
I think part of that too is that it brings a quality I actually learned in my spiritual direction program, which is creating a safe container. And the chapel is that safe container. And from the moment I started in with things, I remember on Facebook doing a little paragraph about myself. And the very first response was from Toto. And he said, I thought I recognized you. And what he did was, I still remember that, Toto. And it still like really touches me, because I think we're coming all at a place from where we struggle and where we've had struggles, and that those struggles have opened us up. And we can discuss them. We know that the chapel is that safe space where there is not going to be any judgment, that we are going to be heard and witnessed, and that we matter. We really matter. And there's no real hierarchy in the discussions. So we all, there's space for as much participation as somebody wants. And it's less about, like you said, Jim, arguing positions, but just deep, deep reflection in a safe space.
To put a spiritual spin on what Julie and Jim have just been saying, I would say that chapel is the manifestation of the priesthood of all believers.
Yeah.
And rather like Julie was saying, you know, I struggled with the fact that in a conventional church, everything is of necessity almost at a very superficial level. I mean, even if you have a discussion of a Bible passage, it would tend to be very much, you know, time limited, time constrained, and certainly there wouldn't be that sense of intimacy and closeness that you would feel. And a lot of it may even be more of a kind of point scoring system where you're trying to show everybody, you know, how much you particularly understand. With the chapel, it's totally different. You know, we're talking on it seems to me we're always talking on a much deeper level. That because I think we all have this mystical bent, we want to go beyond the superficial. What does this say? To perhaps the allegorical and the mystical levels of, well, what does this mean? And more particularly, what does this mean for my life as I'm living it in the world of 2024?
Yeah.
And so much, you know, of our discussion is discussions on a church setting are much more formal and much more limited, and we're tending to get, you know, received opinion. Whereas this way, we are somehow internalizing the readings, and, you know, we are, as somebody said, you know, helping one another along the way. We're all at different stages of the journey. We can support one another, and we can be those loving arms reaching out to embrace one another as we work through the difficulties of the journey.
So much here which I'm wanting to kind of spark off, but I mean, maybe if we just start by just sort of amplifying what you were saying, Jim. I mean, just about, you know, there's two modes of conversation, really, aren't there? You know, there's a kind of argumentative mode, and we do see that a lot. Well, not a lot, but we do see that kind of being exhibited sometimes in the Celtic Christianity group, which I moderate, and you know, it's a public group, it's a big group now. The algorithms have just been kind of bringing people along, so we're suddenly up to, kind of way past 10,000 members, and lots of people who we don't know and don't have a personal connection with and don't have any history with. And you'll see new members launch into a conversation by finding something they disagree with. You do sort of sometimes think the behaviour is people will scroll down until they see something they dislike and take exception to, and choose to interact with in a mode of disagreement. And I suppose because I'm spoiled by my experience in chapel and in other settings, it's just kind of so obvious there is an alternative, that there is the option to go into conversation in cooperative mode, and just directly looking out your kind of points of commonality rather than your points of disagreement, and celebrating your points of commonality, celebrating where you kind of complement each other in your vision of the truth, and sort of building your conversation of that. And I think if you are in that mode, then that is probably kind of all you need to have a crucible for the magic, for the alchemy we've been talking about, where as a group you're then co-creating something which is greater than it's greater than some of the parts, as Julie or Jim said that. But that's very much my experience of the best of our chapel conversations. And I often say this when I lead it, and because I always want to celebrate it, but there's so many times you get a sense of everybody's come along with a piece of the jigsaw, in terms of their previous experience that they can bring to bear, or the readings they can make a link to, or perspectives they can share. It really feels like we have a table, we all have that piece of the jigsaw, and if we do the conversation skillfully together, there's that sense of co-creating something really kind of beautiful and powerful out of our shared experience. And I suppose the other thing I'd add, and maybe the other sort of direction I take this, is I don't think that's unique to spiritual groups. I kind of agree that maybe kind of the way that church is often done doesn't always give space for conversation, doesn't allow space for that kind of human connection. So you sometimes don't get the same dynamic. But I've been in many different groups in a number of different settings where you do get that kind of alchemy. You get that group alchemy where coming together as a group of human beings, regardless of kind of labels and context, you do get that magic happening, kind of in conversation, and and it's beautiful. And I don't think it's really to do with being a spiritual group. As I said, I think it's a potential of human nature which we share very widely. So as well as being to do with the priesthood of all believers, as you say, Phil, I think it's actually past the priesthood of all humanity, of our kind of common lot as human beings.
Well, that's that sacredness that is in the mundane, right? Too. I think it's striking that people don't feel like they have to behave Christianly to show up here, to make a comment here. I like that too, because I mean, you can have a meaningful relationship even with an atheist, in one of the Zoom meetings or online, and there's an exchange, and like you said, there's even a magic there, I think, which is great, that it's not just that there's not gatekeepers here saying, well, if you're not a Christian, you really don't belong. I love that.
And I take everybody along with me as I move through the world, because this kind of depth of conversation changes a person.
Mhm.
And it brings in, it expands my viewpoint. It expands my heart. It expands my compassion. Because as we talk about our joys and challenges, you get to understand that whatever we're going through, we're not alone.
Yeah.
and that there's a group of people that love us and will surround us with the support we need on an emotional level. And yet it's still virtual, and like Justin said, you can kind of take it in your back pocket. I know that I attended some chapel sessions from my parents' home just after my dad passed away. Like I can bring you all with me wherever I am. But I do move through the world differently because I have that. I don't have just my point of view. I have this deep spiritual, it's becoming this like wealth or pool of compassion, empathy, understanding, expansiveness because of the interactions and discussions that we have.
And part of that, Julie, I think, is the richness that the variety of lived experiences bring to the group, because we have the person who lives in a village in Kenya who, depending on the time zone and how they line up, can sometimes join us. We have people who have had traumatic brain injuries who are struggling their way back to what we would think a normal life would be. We have people who are in different countries, like, there's a person on the other side of the world in New Zealand who joins us, frequently. So we're getting different life experiences. So the part of the magic for me is it's purposefully not self-reverent, if that even makes sense. It gives us other lives to look at deeply and appreciate where their life experience has brought them. And I think that container, the safety of the container allows that to happen in a real way. We have one person who in the group who's a regular who is openly talking about her transgender experience and the fact that she has been so welcome and so open about what for some can be a really either difficult or experience that they just don't have any reference to. And this person has been wonderfully patient about sharing her life story in that safe space and helping people who might not understand as well what body dysphoria is all about. And she's just been great. So I really appreciate how the differences, in fact, again, kind of like the opposite of a typical church, where there seems to be a push for uniformity of belief, uniformity of doctrine and stuff. It's really, that gets really flipped on its head in the chapel, which I really appreciate, because we can explore those differences and understand kind of what that means. Or like our friend in Louisiana who has this giant adopted family, because he felt that was what he was called to. And so, wow, what was that like? Those life stories, I think, are really important and a really important component of chapel.
Take this off in a slightly different direction. I think something you say there, Jim, which I think is actually really quite significant about our kind of gift and calling as a group. We're talking about the kind of order of kind of belief and belonging. And there's a book which I mentioned quite a bit in meetings, which is Diane Butler Bass's Christianity After Religion, And the book title itself probably kind of says something, doesn't it? But I mean, her point, one of the main points in that book, is that for a long time Christian identity has been built on, kind of orthodoxy first, right belief first, followed by right practice. And if you've got right belief and right practice, then you might kind of eventually be admitted into belonging. And I mean, her statement really is that kind of Christianity after religion, if there is such a thing as a kind of genuinely postmodern Christianity, it will invert that, she says, that we will start with belonging. We will, our first step is choosing to hold together in community. And after that, we might evolve shared practice. And after that, we might eventually kind of align in terms of belief. But I mean, that's down the line. And I think, in my mind, I don't know if this sort of aligns with anyone else's kind of perception of what's going on, but I think in a way we model that. I think that's very much what we're about as Chapel.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that order of things, but the belonging really comes first. And this is a virtual space, but it feels like it's the equivalent to a house church, even though we're all in different houses. And we could easily be doing this sitting, or what it feels like is that we're sitting around a table having a deep discussion after the meal's done.
Yeah.
And we're just sitting over a cup of coffee and lingering, and it feels like home. And you talked about then what was the second part, the ritual that comes next? It was the inverse was belonging.
Yeah, so orthodoxy, orthopraxy.
Right. So the thing is that we started off this way, and now we offer communion. So we're getting into that in terms of nothing that's strict orthodoxy, but we have included ritual into things. So our sessions are ordered, meaning we have a time for fellowship, we have a reading, the 15 minutes of silence, a couple more readings and discussion. And so that it's very ritual-like in how we gather. And then, and we start with the belonging piece where we're checking in with each other. And then we also have communion once a month, plus certain either times of the year, like church times of the year, seasonally, or related to different saint days. And it's also, we're gathering together as the body of Christ with communion across the world. And we don't expect to have the same opinions, but we do find, I'm going to use truth with a capital T, in what others say and what we read and discuss together.
I think there's another aspect that I want to build on there, Julie and Tony, which is not only are we a model for a new kind of Christianity, which is actually a very old kind of Christianity, but I really liked your house church analogy, having been involved myself in house churches back in the 80s and the 90s. And what you say is exactly true. I mean, and I think the fellowship in those meetings was a little bit deeper because of the domestic setting. But where I'm going with this is that we live in a world of fractured community, where in fact the idea of community has itself been largely, discredited in popular discourse. We are all, in the eyes of our culture and society, we are all individuals who are mostly going to be defined in terms of what we produce and what we consume. Community has kind of gone out of the window as an idea, and yet we know how fractured our society is. We know what the evils of our society are: climate change, war, economic inequality, racism, sexism, discrimination against LGBTQI people, all of the above. And all of this springs from, in the end, a lack of community, a lack of being able to see the other as somebody made in the image of God. As C.S. Lewis said, next to the Holy Eucharist, the most holy object presented to our senses is our neighbor. And most of us live in communities where we probably don't even know who our neighbors are. And so here we are as a virtual community, and we're building something which I believe is, of all the needs that people have in the world, the most fundamental need is to belong. And we offer a place of belonging, and we are just saying, come as you are. Come as with your baggage and your questions, and take off your shoes, sit down and enjoy this hospitality, enjoy the food, enjoy the drink. You don't have to bring anything yourself except yourself, and just be. And that is so refreshing. No one is going to ask you to believe anything. No one is asking you to sign up to a doctrinal statement. No one is going to question why you believe what you believe. It's all just, you are valuable, you are loved, and just join the dance, as it were.
Oh, Phil, that was really well said. I really, really like that. And I know, like, my own kids, my son would not have any interest in going through the front door of any church because of all those things, like, the doctrinal statements, etc. But he's one of the coolest people I know, and obviously I'm biased, but I think that that's a really important thing, because I think that people are not even interested in showing up to a church because of the baggage that many churches bring, or the baggage that the image of a church or the image of a denomination brings. And we're none of that, so I think that I would encourage people to realize that that difference in structure is a dramatic difference. And so there's like, I see those sort of churches as having very high entrance hurdles. It's back to what Tony was mentioning about Diana Butler Bass. There's this huge set of hurdles before we'll ever let you belong. And if you piss somebody off by looking the wrong way or doing the wrong thing, your belonging becomes conditional. It's like, yeah, no, that's not what we're about. But also, I think the thing is that organizations, there's a sort of unwritten expectation that once you become part of an organization, you're part of that organization for forever, and you have duties to perform that are transactional and conditional for belonging. And I think that people can come to the chapel for a period of time and get what they need from chapel. And if they then spin off and go about their life, that's what they need to do. So I don't think that there's an expectation in the chapel that once you're in, you're going to be like put on a committee, or you need to be a moderator, or you need to, I like that happens with an organization, especially a religious organization. That's a really huge difference in the model here, I think.
Yeah,
I think
oh, go ahead, Tony.
Just following Jim to say, I think there's probably a natural trajectory which, hopefully many people will follow, which is kind of from virtual community back to real life community. I mean, we were talking before we started recording just about what's your, kind of hybrid working from home, being on Zoom for 8-12 hours a day. That's a real burden to the soul now, isn't it? And if an experience of community in virtual chapel is healing and kind of leads to people, kind of being able to, kind of find the courage or the capacity just to kind of go out and find community where they are, then that's a really great trajectory for people to follow in my mind. And obviously we've all found things to keep us together in this space. The six of us on the call, and other friends as well. But hopefully that's a possibility for people as well.
Yeah, it's
in
lovely
this
if they
space.
stay.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. It's lovely if they stay, and it's okay if they go.
And this space is also complementary to whatever church or not that's going on in people's lives. So there are some people that go to church regularly and are super involved, and this also fills a need for something deeper or something that they long for. Some people, this has replaced their faith community, and both are welcome. It doesn't matter. This space is complementary to the rest of our lives. And we find community in all sorts of different ways, no matter who we are.
Yeah, I was just going to say a minute ago, after Jim, you were talking about trying to, hustle people to get on committees and things like that. And that was one of my original intentions. I loathe paperwork. I love to write, but there are a few things in life which I loathe, and paperwork is at the top of the list, perhaps, and especially taxes. But I found when I was a pastor at a more conventional sort of mainline Protestant church, that there was a lot of structural work that had to go into maintaining the community. There was a lot of committee meetings, and there was a lot of record keeping, and there was a lot of reports to be filled and annual reports to be reviewed and stuff. And when we first started the chapel, my intention was to to have none of that at all. Now it turns out that actually some of it's wise, and some people have helped me to see the wisdom in it, and we've done, I think, a really good job of having just enough to make things make sense without becoming this sort of burdensome thing where we're always trying to fill roles, and you have to have 6 people on this committee, and cold calling people, will you serve on the finance committee, whatever the case. And I love that that's, for me, as coming from sort of like my own sort of like which job I like better. I'm really glad that I get to focus on the things that I feel called to as a minister. And part of my work as a spiritual director too, I do a lot with clergy who are sort of looking for a deeper thing and didn't find it in seminary, which is my experience as well. But it's a really common sense that the vocation for which they were called is not the work that they actually do, and not with all clergy, obviously, but it's a really common thing. And so I'm really glad that we've been able to just work it out and keep things simple, and then we get to focus on healing and thinking about the nature of the universe and all those different things that I actually feel called to do. So for me, anyway, that's one of the sort of blessings of it too, that we get to keep our eyes on what the real goods, and we don't get lost in the weeds of bureaucracy.
But we do get lost in the weeds of spirituality.
Fair. Okay, that's fair.
Well, I would say more like the dark wood of spirituality. If we want to go back to Dante, and I found myself lost in a dark wood, and we have our Virgils and our Beatrices to guide us out into paradise, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, part of my journey here, I didn't talk about it a lot before, but I suppose I kind of reconnected with the kind of spiritual path through the world of kind of transformational men's work, sort of the mythopoetic men's journey stuff. And one thing that happened shortly before finding this community was I sort of joined a short course in men's work, and I introduced myself to that group using that line from Dante, Phil. I awoke I was in the middle of the woods. It was trackless, and I was alone. And I was at that point in my life. I mean, I very much was, yeah, trackless and alone, and still deep in the woods at the moment. But I'm not alone anymore. And kind of having found community and having, yeah, kind of in a sense, kind of called in my tribe. Yeah, not alone anymore, and that makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
I
this
can
was
relate to
very
that.
much a never alone and always loved group.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, because I felt that although I loved the church that I'm in and I'm still associated with, I love the Episcopal Church and its broad range of theologies and its attention and centering on the Eucharist rather than a theological doctrinal definition. I still felt there was something missing from my life. I've always loved to go deeper. And I've always felt as well that there was a dimension of God that could actually be experienced in the here and now. Now, that's why back in the day I was really heavily involved for about 15 or so years in charismatic Christianity. I belonged to a couple of fellowships. I had some very interesting spiritual experiences during the time. And what I love about the charismatic church was that it introduced me to the idea that God was to be experienced here and now. And I find that I'm coming back to that. And one reason why the chapel has held its attraction for me is that I come back to that at all of our meetings, particularly in the silences. But this time, with the advantage that I'm not trying to constrain my experience of God into a tighter theological box. Now the theological box has gone, and I feel that I can experience God, as mystery, as infinite, in the apophatic rather than the cataphatic way, if you want to use that kind of language. And I am so grateful to everyone on this call and to everyone I meet in the chapel for helping me and realize, as Tony just said, we're not alone. I felt I was plowing a lone furrow for so long, and then I suddenly find, oh, hey, other people think the same way that I do. I'm not alone anymore. This is wonderful. You are my people. You are my tribe. And I love it.
Yeah, and not alone. Like, that reminded me, I love that we added the silence on Fridays, so that if you can join and show up, you can share silence for an hour on Zoom. You don't say anything or nothing. But if you can't, you can still know that there's somebody there who is in intercession and is holding that place of healing for you. So hopefully, even something like that will be available to people if they understand, hey, this is going on. I'm not alone. I have support. And for those that want to join the practice, it's a wonderful practice.
Yeah, that's so right, Toto. The last little while, I mean, the Friday silence was always one of my favorites. Not that I have a favorite, but I love deep silence, I should say. And I've always sort of been growing up Quaker, I guess, maybe, and all that. But I feel like silence is where I often feel a deep connection with people, as well as in the conversation. And so the Friday silence was always like this real touchstone moment for me, where I got to really just settle down and be with a group of people that I know and love, who are also just sharing that same silence. And with everything with the baby and the chaos in our lives, I haven't been going to silence lately. But what you just described has been my exact experience. Every Friday at 2:00, like, I get a text from someone saying peace afterwards. Sometimes we'll text each other peace or something. And I just remember that there's this place where it's being held. The silence is still there. And it's like I get to draw from it, and I feel it. I don't know how to describe it properly, But somehow in the hidden recesses of nature, there's some kind of stream of contemplation that comes out of that time and touches me even when I'm not able to show up. So like it carries me even when I'm not there. So anyway, I related to what you just said, so thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And I really love that. As far as I know, we've never dropped the ball on the Friday silences, and there's no coordination on that. You know, people turn up when they can, and sometimes I know there's times when, you know, kind of it has just been me on the call, and I know there's been times when it's been Toto or Dan or someone else has been kind of holding the phone, and even that kind of feels so kind of worthy. You know, it's like I'm here, I'm keeping my watch for this hour on behalf of everyone else who can't be here, but somehow over like 2.5 years of doing that, I don't think there's ever been a Friday when like no one's been on the call, which I just love.
Yeah, and I've been rereading Aelred of Ravo's book Spiritual Friendship lately. And I love the way he describes how we come to Christ through our community, or through our spiritual community. And we come through our interactions with all people, because all people are the face of Christ. But there's this sort of unique way that within a close-knit spiritual community that it happens, where we pray for one another, he describes. And he says that in praying for your friend, you taste the sweetness of Christ as he walks by, and you are lifted up with your friend into Christ. And before you know it, affection melts into affection, and all of you are one in the same love. That's a slight paraphrase of it. It's pretty close. And I guess I just reread that passage the other day, and it just struck me again that that's that same kind of thing, that the space still exists, and we're lifted up together, you know, and there's something about it that strengthens me, I think, in that. I might go back to it was something someone, I don't remember because it was a while ago now, someone had said a little bit ago about how creating the space for people to just sort of be who they are and come and land in a space without all the pretense and the worrying and all that kind of stuff, how it allows people to flourish and to come forward. And I think that's such a key concept. My elder in ceremony used to say that was his thing, you know, and we'd have these long talking circles around the fire, like hours and hours, and people would share, and we would hug each other, and we would pray for each other, and all this kind of stuff. And it was always these, very much like chapel, and chapel almost in some ways is me recreating that in a sense. But he always said to me, like, you don't have to do anything. all you have to do is just sit there and smile at people and remind them that they're worthy, and let them talk, and God will do the rest, and the people will come. And I watched it happen over and over again, where people came with, you know, people come to ceremony for healing. So people came with addictions and trauma and all these things. We did a bunch of different stuff, but the main thing we did was just hold the space for them and just sit in a circle and listen, and let someone talk and cry for 45 minutes and just wait until they say they're done, and then hug them a bunch. And that alone, like, everyone cries, and then it's like everyone's life has changed. And so I think it was really touching to me that came up as people's sort of, like, you guys picked up on that, because it's something that was in my heart the whole time starting it. And so it's really wonderful to see that it's sort of just become part of the fabric of the thing. Because I think that is such a key and simple practice, but such a key one. Everyone has something magic in them waiting to be born. Yeah.
Well, I have to witness to that, Justin, and I think so much of what I'm doing in my life nowadays is actually coming out of my interactions in the chapel. I've felt a new spurt to my creativity, a new blossoming of my creative skills. To some extent, it's a return to things that I think I knew 30 or 40 years ago, but had never had the courage to explore, and, you know, got, as one does, very, very sidetracked. But the chapel is helping me to find the essence of who I truly am and share, then take that out and share it with the world, because the world needs all of us, as Howard Thurman says, to know what it is that gives us drive and energy, and to make that come alive for the benefit of all. And so that's why I'm so pleased to be part of this space and part of contributing to holding this space for others.
Well, oftentimes in chapel, when we get to this moment where there's a little bit of more silence and we've been talking for a while, our usual practice is to open it up if anyone has any final thoughts that they wanted to share, something they didn't get to say, or something that they think want to wrap up with before we actually do wrap up. So I'll just do that now. Does anybody have anything left, or has everything that's been said need to be said?
I'll add one last thing. I would say that this conversation is very reflective of the flavor of our discussions, where we're bringing in our different viewpoints, and we are being deeply reflective and our authentic selves, and it all kind of coalesces. And I've been pointing to different people on the Zoom screen, but it has this kind of natural flow to it, where the next person who speaks, it kind of bubbles up and amplifies or twists. I don't mean twist in a bad way, but twist in a new direction to what needs to be said. And I've witnessed that here today. And so this might not be the exact chapel where we're reading different things, but it very much has the flavor of what our sessions and time together usually are.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming and having this conversation with me. And I look forward to seeing you all again, I'm sure, very soon.